Friends, continuing with our discussion on externalities, we were discussing negative externality and positive externality, and we said that negative externality is cost to the third party, whereas positive externality is a benefit to the third party. Let us spend some more time on this concept. This concept of externalities it was introduced by Pigot in his famous book, The Economics of Welfare, and he said that there are some activities which have a cost which is greater than the private cost. So when he said that, he basically meant that there are certain costs which are not taken by the, which are not accounted for when the price is discovered in the market. So by private cost, he is referring to the cost which does not consider externalities. Whereas he uses another term, namely the social cost, which according to him would include the externalities, which would include the value of the externalities, and when that value is added to the value which is discovered in the privately in the market, those two together would be called as a social cost. For example, uh, again we take the same famous example of air pollution, and we see that there is a market mechanism acting, wherein the car industry would sell the cars to the consumers, and the consumers and the car industries, if they are not regulated, in the sense that if they are not allowed, if they don't pay for the pollution, then the cost which the consumer is buying the car from the industry, or the price at which the industry is selling the car to the consumer, we can call it as a private cost, right? But you know that this when there is a sale of a car to a consumer, the car is going to pollute, and this pollution is going to impact the consumer in the form, impact the third party, not the consumer, not the producer. What could be the impact? One can think of, let us say, an extreme case where the particulate matter or soot which are coming from the exhaust gases of a vehicle, they cause some diseases like asthma or lung cancer or so on, right? So if you quantify that and you put some cost to it, cost of treating asthma, cost of treating lung cancer, then we discover some price, and that price, if you add to the private cost, it would be called as a social cost. So left unattended, the car industry and consumer would be operating only on the private cost. But if the spillover costs of air pollution are included in the private cost, it becomes a cost which is over and above the private cost, and it is the social cost. So in case of negative externality, the social cost has to be higher than the private cost. Same thing would be applied to tobacco industry. Tobacco industry would adversely affect the third party, meaning the passive smokers, and the cost is neither borne by the tobacco industry nor by the consumers if you do not account for this negative externality, right? So the private cost would be the cost which we don't account for the adverse health impact on the passive smokers. But if you try to account for the private the impact adverse health impact on the passive smokers, the cost has to be added to the private cost, and then it becomes the social cost. So social cost again would be greater than the private cost in case of a negative externality like passive smoking. uh, there is a term which is often used, and I would spend some time on this concept, which is called as a marginal social cost and marginal private cost. Now, what this term of marginal social cost and marginal private cost means? Uh, for this, let me show you one interesting concept. Marginal, when we talk about the marginal social cost, marginal social cost means uh, a single additional single unit when it is manufactured. What would be the impact? Means, for example, if you take a case of public transport, we all know that public transport, if it is introduced, it becomes a positive externality, and that would reduce air pollution, right? But if I want to, and I know that, so it means that the social benefit would be greater than the private benefit. But then, how many buses are to be uh, sent, or how many buses are to be sent by the depot, or how many buses are to be purchased by the depot, bus depot, in order to in order to avail the social benefits? So that decision has to be made on the marginal costs. And what does it mean? It means that mm, uh, cost of producing an additional commodity. If I want to calculate the marginal cost of a bus, then what is the additional cost? If I have already ordered 100 buses, so it comes at certain cost. So if I want to buy additional one bus, that is 101 bus, then that cost would be a marginal cost. Okay, marginal cost. Similarly, if I take some other example, like plastic bags, right? So if, let us say that 100 plastic bags are available at a certain price, and if the manufacturer wants to produce an additional plastic bag, so the marginal private cost would be the cost of producing that additional plastic bag, right? So marginal, when you use the term marginal, why this term marginal has to be introduced? It is because uh, in this intervention, we are not completely stopping the production of the negative externality good. Means, in this approach, in the market economy framework, when we see that, again take the same example of a car polluting the environment, we don't say that, okay, so we just stop producing cars. What we would say that, let us limit the number of cars. And by when we say that we want to limit the number of cars, we have to introduce a term called as marginal cost, right? So when I'm saying marginal private cost of car production, it means that, suppose a factory is producing 100 cars, and if it wants to produce an additional car, then at what cost that additional car has to be produced? So that becomes what could be called as marginal private cost for that additional car. And now, what would be the marginal social cost of that? So when 100 cars are operating, and the 100 cars would pollute something, it would pollute, and it might cause an adverse health impact on the people in the society. So if the 101 car is introduced, then the it is going to impact one more person. So one more person, or it might impact, impact the society. That additional car is going to impact the society, not one more person. The additional car is going to impact the society. So when you say that additional car is going to impact that society, it is going to create more pollution. That, if you give some cost to it, that becomes the marginal uh, marginal externality cost. If that marginal externality cost has to be added to the marginal private cost, it becomes the marginal social cost. So marginal social cost would be, in a way, an additional of marginal private cost plus the additional cost of mitigating the negative externality, right? So these concepts are very useful. So it is not simply enough to talk about the total social cost or the total private cost. It is equally important for us to understand this concept of marginal private costs and marginal social costs. So we'll continue with this discussion on externalities and how do you account for these externalities in our next lecture also.